awesome episode of Nutrition Plus 101. We have Noah, Jesko, and Harry Hudgins. So Noah, introduce us and then tell us also, introduce us to Harry.
For those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Noah Jesko. I started with Nutrition Plus 2 years ago as a range specialist. All of my research was in some type of range scenario at West Texas A&M. So Dee brought me on to help the sales reps get and keep customers by taking range samples and building custom minerals. Uh, I'm really excited for where these podcasts are going to take us and the stuff that we can all learn together. Today, we have Harry Hudgins, who's been an owner in Nutrition Plus since 2015 and who's been selling mineral in some form or fashion since the early 90s. Harry, can you tell everybody a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, I'm a cattle person first, of course. We run our own cow calf operation. Uh, in the early '90s, I had lots of uh, economic problems and kind of fell into the mineral business and started selling mineral in the early '90s with a company called Vigortone, and that's really where Nutrition Plus, all of us got together. We all worked for this company, Vigortone, and then I kind of came off of it in the late '90s and started my own company. And then the other guys, probably early 2000s spun off and started Nutrition Plus. And then we all got back together and have worked together, for a good while.
Yes, sir. Kind of a full circle to being together at Vigortone to then coming back around back together with Nutrition Plus.
Yes, exactly.
So today we are going to talk about one of our most popular tags, and actually our most popular tag, our MP2S. And guys that are listening, we're just going to go straight down the tag and we're going to talk about each macro and micro mineral as they come up listed on the tag. So, Harry, the MP2S, the calcium minimum is 14%, the maximum is 16.8. Can you just talk us through why it is important to have calcium in our mixes?
Yes, calcium is probably one of the most important minerals in the macro minerals. And calcium, of course, we think of milk, we think about our bones, and we think about our teeth and such. And the NP2S is a 2-to-1 calcium phosphorus ratio. And when we go through looking at grass analysis or forage analysis, our improved grasses are very low in calcium. And therefore, we like to use a 2-to-1 ratio calcium phosphorus on those improved grasses. So that's where we get a calcium at 14 to 16%. And again, calcium, bone, teeth, skeletal issues like that is very important.
Yes, sir. One of those you pointed out already, but the milk production, especially for lactating cows, that's something to keep an eye out whenever you might be out comparing tags to other competing companies, looking at that and making sure that calcium levels are high. Harry pointed out that we like to have a 2-to-1 calcium to phos ratio. So just next on the list is our phosphorus, and it's at a minimum of 7%. Harry, talk about why phosphorus is important.
Yes, I guess when we all think phosphorus, the very first thing we think about is reproduction. Um, it's also very big in the bone and the teeth and formulation of there. But in the 50s, they ran some great studies on phosphorus, and phosphorus is very key in getting a cow to breed back. So, we probably over push phosphorus in a lot of issues, and phosphorus is bitter, and so the animal, will have some palatability issues with high phosphorus. And the NP2S being 7, we found that if we drop that phosphorus level down to a little bit lower level, that it's more palatable and that the animals will eat it more evenly. And we won't have peaks and valleys in consumption, and really we'll end up getting more phosphorus in the animal than maybe the old time 12-12s or someone's high phos.
Yes, sir. And on that FOS, um, it's important for our guys that are in the panhandle to know that panhandle forages are typically FOS deficient. And so
Very
a
so.
product like this can help bridge that gap between a deficient forage and what the animal actually needs. I would also like to point out that if you have a really high FOS mineral, you can increase urinary calculi in males, which is basically it's crystallized mineral in the kidneys, and it can cause severe pain for our bulls. So making sure that our bull mineral is not too high in FOS is something that we should also be keeping an eye on. Next, we have salt. So this mineral is a 17 minimum and a 20% maximum. Harry, tell us about salt.
Okay, salt is very important, just like, we as people, realize we need salt, and the animal, of course, realizes he needs salt. And, the animal needs a half ounce to an ounce of salt per day in his daily diet. And so that's where we usually come up. Really, an ounce of salt per head per day is what they need. Uh, so salt is very important. And we also use salt for two things in the mineral. We use the salt to help bring them to the mineral. And then we also use the salt to limit their consumption, because a few licks, then it's a little salty to them. So they walk on and go on and take care of, harvesting what Mother Nature gave them versus what is in a bag.
Yes, sir. So, Harry, can you just real quick talking about the salt, too much of it potentially driving the cattle from coming into the mineral? Can you talk
Well,
about how adding salt blocks on top of a formulated mineral, that negative effect in consumption?
yes, and I don't know why it is. I guess an animal, we as people do not realize we need phosphorus or copper or something like that, and I don't think a cow is any smarter than we are. So, but we do realize when we need salt, and that animal does as well. And they've done a lot of very good studies in these universities and set up cameras and such like that, and they've put salt maybe in one trough, mineral in another trough. And if we do that, if we put salt blocks in one area and mineral in the other, they've they've noticed that the animals will pretty well just hit the salt. And so it's very important not to put a salt block out and then mineral in another area. I know as producers, we all try to watch our economics, but we'll a lot of times try to cheat our expenses by adding salt to that product or throwing a salt block in a different spot. But really, we're cheating ourselves, because the consumption of the mineral will drop in half or maybe even more, and we're not getting the mineral consumption that we need.
Yes, sir. One of the main things for our reps to think of is if somebody calls you and they're talking about underconsumption of a mineral, that is one of the first questions to ask. Ask the producer, are you putting out salt blocks? And if the answer is yes, and that's a pretty well red flag, that's why they're under consuming that mineral. So there's something to be aware of. So next on the tag is magnesium at 1%. Go ahead, Harry.
Okay. Well, mag is a very important product, whether we're in West Texas, East Texas, wherever we are. Now, pretty well, when we pull forages, we'll probably overall probably really even need a 3% mag everywhere on just dry forages.
Yes, sir.
But mag is very, very bitter. And so therefore, we a lot of people like ourselves and our competitors will put mag at like 1%. And we're kind of getting a little bit of mag in them to take care of things. But magnesium also on lactating animals if they're running on very green forages, which I'm more of an East Texas person. So we have more greener pastures or more greener wheats and stuff like small grain pastures. If we have lactating cows, the magnesium needs to be a good deal higher. So in Nutrition Plus, our high mag mineral would be a 10% mag. And that is very well needed on lactating cows to stop milk fever, grass tetany issues.
Yes, sir. I'm glad you touched on that, on the grass tetany. Here in the Panhandle, we don't typically run into that very often. I have seen it in a few scenarios, but for the most part, uh, we aren't going to see that. But a lot of those producers in the east and in the south, whenever they're on that really lush green pasture, need to be looking out for that. And if that is a concern, they can increase their magnesium. Next, we have potassium at 0.5%. Harry, can you tell us about potassium?
Okay, well, potassium is a different beast. You know, in a lot of areas we're pretty well sufficient in potassium, but potassium's danger is potassium can lock up things. So when we get farther west, we sometimes have higher potassium levels. And the first thing that potassium will lock up is magnesium. So in potassium issues, you know, can even show us grass tetany milk fever issues on not even green grasses and such. So when you do have grass tetany or milk fever issues out west, a lot of times we need to check. We may have high levels of potassium. And another reason of potassium, maize stalks, a lot of times if we're feeding maize stalks, they'll be very high in potassium. A lot of our Sudans and sorghum classes of forages are a lot of times very high in potassium. So in those forages, we need to watch and if we do have those forages, or if we do know we're in areas of high potassium, magnesium even gets in a greater position.
Yes, sir. And that's going right back to what we'll cover in a later podcast, but is our grass sampling. And so knowing and understanding the forage that these cows or calves or whatever are consuming is extremely important. So testing for that, making sure that potassium is not too high and tying something else up. So next we're going to get into our first micro mineral, which is cobalt at 10 parts per million. Can you tell us about cobalt, Harry?
Gosh, now I hate to show my ignorance here, but now cobalt, you know, manganese and cobalt, when I was started in the mineral business, was really not all that big of a deal. Uh, you know, it's microorganisms in the rumen and taking in the vitamins and taking through the vitamins. Uh, you know, in the cattle industry, you know, we saw cobalt industry more in sheep and stuff like that. So I'm terrible about sitting here telling you about cobalt. So I'm going to lean back on you, Noah, and you tell us more about
Yeah,
cobalt.
yes, sir. So cobalt is required by rumen microbes to make B12. And B12 is extremely important in energy production and protein metabolism. So whenever we're feeding cobalt, that's the main thing that we're looking for is to make sure that they can synthesize B12 and that they can use that for their energy metabolism. So the next one is going to be
And
copper.
Noah, and I guess in that issue, would that come back into brainers or polio?
Yes, sir. That would tie back in. Yes, sir.
Okay, because you know when we think of a brainer or a you know polio, we want to dose them with thiamine, which is a vitamin B, and of course we don't put vitamin B in cattle minerals because the rumen makes its own vitamin B.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The looking at some of those micros, that micro minerals or what the rumen microbes need to synthesize, that's one of the primary ones is that cobalt, needing that for the B12. So next, Harry, we're going to talk about copper.
Okay.
And I know you really like to talk about copper. So 1400 parts per million in MP2S, and tell us
Yeah.
why copper is so important.
Well, copper is the second component in our immune system. Zinc and copper work together in our immune system. So copper, in my, I guess there was a very good professor out of A&M that came out about 20 years ago and brought out copper deficiencies in black-hided animals. And he said that, when we saw the red hair, yellow hair around ears or on the backs of those black animals, that was a very good sign of copper deficiency. And we started really paying a lot of attention to copper. And like I said, copper is the second component in the immune system. So if we don't have a good zinc and good copper level, we don't have much of an immune system to accept our uh, antibiotics, our vaccines, and such like that. I love copper levels, even higher than what's in MP2S, but I like to push copper.
Yes,
And
sir.
but don't get me wrong, I have seen copper push too much, and there is, uh, just like any other mineral, more is not always better, and we
Yes,
can
sir.
have toxic levels of copper or any of these levels of mineral, but a copper toxicity ends up turning into, you know, affecting the immune system and the way that animal does. So don't think always copper higher is better, of
Yes,
course.
sir. So I like that you pointed out that the dull coat. So that is one of the main ways that you can tell if there is a copper deficiency is looking at the dull hair coats. Another is poor conception. Like if you have poor conception, maybe a dull hair coat or one or two of them in your herd, you can almost guarantee that there is a copper deficiency there somewhere. So next we're going to talk about iodine. Harry, can you tell us a little bit about iodine?
Well, I love the iodine levels, and I mean, I push iodine a lot heavier than a lot of people do, and I really feel that iodine comes back in our foot health, in our lump jaws and such like that. So in a lot of my tags, I push the iodine level even higher than what we have on the NP2S, uh, just because in the old days the iodine was a good deal higher than it is now
Yes, sir.
and such. So like some of my tags on iodine will it's very important for the thyroid, of course,
Yes,
and
sir.
such like that. But I kind of old school, being an older guy, still relate it to feet and lump jaw and such. And the iodine level on the on the NP2S is 100, and I put a lot of my iodine levels on some of my select tags at 350.
Yes, sir. And that is a level that we see more and more often in some of our customs. And so if a producer or a customer of yours wants increased iodine, we can do that no problem. And it would not be detrimental to increase those levels up to 350, 400 parts per million on iodine. And Harry, since you went ahead and mentioned iodine and feet, we're going to go ahead and skip down just a few and talk about zinc. Zinc
Yes.
in MP2S at 4,200 parts per million. Harry, will you tell us about zinc?
Yeah, zinc is our main component. And of course, I skipped one little deal on copper. We can short cows on copper, and we store copper in our liver, and humans and cows, of course, both. And zinc is different. Zinc is the main component in our immune system, but we don't store zinc in our bodies. So zinc is so important that we get it in our daily diets and such. And zinc is probably the key when we say immune system. Zinc is also very important in feet health. And the chelated zinc, a lot of the guys on the chelates have found that the chelated zinc or the zinc complexes, or however, whichever ones you want to talk about with amino acid locked into zinc, has been a very, very added feature to help keep foot health in a better place and stuff.
Yes, sir. And the foot health is extremely important for any of our guys that might be dry lotting cows or might be weaning and keeping their own calves in a grow yard scenario. Protecting those animals from mud, zinc is going to be huge in that aspect. Another area is if any producers that might be customers of ours are doing rotational grazing and they're using really high stocking densities, that is going to disrupt the ground more than just a continuous grazing, which is going to maybe lead to more mud and more pressure on the cattle, which is going to increase stress. A scenario like that is something where we might look at going with the chelated zinc or just increasing uh, zinc in that mineral. Just something to keep an eye on. So next, we're going to go back up and we're going to talk about manganese, and then we're going to talk about selenium. So Harry, can you tell us a little bit about manganese and selenium?
I'm going to let you talk about manganese. Now,
Okay.
selenium is so important. And what has happened to selenium? We are bound by law on selenium. And because selenium somewhere down the road, they thought was building up in our water tables. So they've got us now basically, like if you'll look at any of our tags, we're a 3 to 4 ounce consumption. Our selenium level will be 26 parts per million. So uh, I really feel that we are basically not getting enough selenium in our animals. And the first thing we think about selenium is retained placentas. And the so if we have animals with having retained placenta animals, it's selenium. But I will say that the dairymans have come back and done some great studies, and vitamin E works hand in hand with selenium. So if we're bound by law on selenium, we can always raise our vitamin E levels way up, and that will help us greatly in retained placentas.
Yes, sir. That is one of the main things to think about if you do have retained placentas is selenium and vitamin E. Vitamin E, like Harry said, they work together extremely well. So going back up to manganese, just the main and primary role of manganese is reproduction. It's reproduction hormones in the cow and it's calf development in utero. So if anyone asks why manganese, just tell them reproduction, and that will hit all of it. So now we're done, Harry, with the minerals. So we're going to talk about the three vitamins. We kind of already talked about vitamin E, but
Yes.
vitamin A and vitamin D3. Can you tell us about those?
Okay. Vitamin A is another big function in reproduction. And I really felt like we've gone through some years. We had some plants blow up in vitamins, and we ended up having to drop vitamins. We used to, in my early days, vitamin A was always at 300,000 IU, but I really think it was overkill. But vitamins in those days were very inexpensive. Uh, I personally uh, have never seen white muscle disease in cattle. Now in sheep, it's very, it happens a lot more. Uh, but vitamin A deficiency would be a white muscle disease or something like that. Uh, vitamin D is basically we get it from the sun. So in the sun belt, vitamin D I don't feel is that important. And of course, our vitamin D levels will be a good deal lower. In NP2S, our vitamin A is like 150,000, and then we go to vitamin D, and it drops down to 15,000.
Yes,
But
sir.
both of those are so important, and bone growth, vision, reproduction in vitamin A, Uh, the vitamin D, of course, affects so many other things. Just phosphorus. I mean, it helps calcium and phosphorus work better in the system and stuff like that.
Yes, sir. I would like to throw out there on vitamin A, the most critical point to ensure that there is vitamin A is whenever cattle are not on a green growing forage. Whenever they are on a green forage, um, that's going to be rich in beta carotenes. And so the animal doesn't need as much vitamin A. But anytime that forage is dormant in the fall and winter, we need to make sure that vitamin A levels are higher. Um, Harry, I want to talk to us real quick since we've covered everything in the tag. Can you talk to us about where to place mineral, whether that is a loose mineral or a block,
Huh?
uh, just to drive consumption, or maybe
Yes.
to lower consumption? How would you tackle that problem?
I like to put mineral close to water, and as the animal, so just in the travel areas. So if that animal's going to water, he's going to travel by the mineral feeder or the mineral block and such like that, back and forth. Uh, if it's always funny out in the mineral business. We'll always have people say, "Oh, the cattle aren't eating the mineral, or the cattle are overeating the mineral," and such like that. So where we place mineral has got a lot to do with it and stuff. But to kind of back up to what Noah just hit on, if a plant is green, it's loaded in vitamins. If a plant is brown, dormant, it doesn't have any vitamins. Uh, it's so funny in a plant that is lush green, early growth, some reason or another, in that fast growing grasses, the cattle crave more salt then. So a lot of times as mineral salesmen, if we're going to get a call about overconsumption, it's usually going to be in the lush, early quick growth, or in the real drought areas, and such like that. And I really feel that the mineral, what it is, those forages, the way they have cured or the way they're growing, makes that animal crave salt. And the animal's not craving mineral. In my day, the old timers would say, well, they're overeating mineral, but they must need it. The way we formulate our minerals, the 3 to 4 ounces in any situation is meeting their needs. So when we see overconsumption, they're just craving salt. So that's why there's overconsumption. They're just overeating the mineral to get that salt need.
Yes, sir. And anytime that our producers have, or our sales reps have questions from their producers, if they want to reach out to myself or to Harry, you can just give the office a call. You can ask us any of these questions. Uh, why are they over consuming? Why are they under consuming? What can we change? What can we look at, etc. So I know myself and Harry, for the most part, is open to uh, helping everybody. Harry might be a little bit harder to get a hold of because he is so busy still selling mineral. Harry, if you could tell our sales reps just one thing that you have learned since the 90s about selling mineral, what would you leave them with?
Oh gosh. Well, again, the particle size in a mineral is so important. And when we say particle size, we want to see those particles as close to being the same size, and we need every bag to be the exact same. And in a company like Nutrition Plus, we work our way into having the superior product, mix superior, and that product to be the same every time they open that bag. And if it is, mineral consumption can be sometimes an issue, but if that product is consistent every time, you're going to see consistent consumption. And us being just basically mineral people, I think we have a great advantage over some of the big boys like a Purina, a Cargill, um, uh, some of those guys because they're feed people first. Now, in my early years, all of those companies didn't care much about their mineral and just, had it there. I will say now they are making better products, but still, in us being just mineral folks, we pretty well know if you're in South Texas, if you're in West Texas, if you're in New Mexico, if you're in Oklahoma, we've pulled forward samples all over this country, and we really know what most of those areas need. And then we have NOAA to help you, to back you up, to go in and repull samples if we have issues. Water is very important. A lot of those people don't ever think about water, but water is the key component there. And we just have a great advantage over our competitors because we are the mineral people.
I think that is one thing that really sets us apart, like you said, Harry, is that we are guys that are in it every single day, that are around cows, and that are just out there taking care of customers, selling mineral. Um, like I said, for all of our reps, if you need or have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, send us an email, call the office, however you need to get in touch with us, and we'll answer any questions that you might have. Thank y'all.